Hi, and welcome to Power Play. I'm Michael Couture. Tonight, the House is set to rise for the summer. Parliament is also expected to pass the Liberal government's controversial Major Products Bill tonight. That, despite criticism from First Nations leaders over a lack of consultation. Expected to hear from the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, this hour, and we'll bring that to you live. Then, as the weather heats up, the Conservatives are cooling.
Anytime you don't form government, you have to have those honest conversations with ourselves as a team, as a caucus, as a party.
Poll numbers show the popularity of the Tories and their leader, Pierre Poilievre, is plunging. What will the party focus on over the summer break? And is Pierre Poilievre still the right person to lead this party?
Absolutely.
Opposition leader in the House, Andrew Scheer, will be here in moments, and we'll ask him that. Plus, pass or fail? Which Canadian politicians made the grade this year, and which should go to summer school? The front bench with Sabrina Grover, Melanie Banerjee, George Soul, and Rachel Aiello will give their assessments just a little later on in the show. First, though,
statements that are meaningless.
We're watching Parliament Hill at this hour, where the contentious Bill C-5, also known as the One Canadian Economy Act, is expected to pass. This is a live look right now at the House of Commons. That's Elizabeth May, the Green Party leader. She is continuing that debate right now. The Liberals are expected to pass the bill with the help of the Conservatives, but we are still seeing that debate. Now, this legislation allows Cabinet to grant federal approvals for major projects, like a pipeline, more quickly. While it's slated to pass, it hasn't been without criticism from environmental and Indigenous groups, not only because it was rushed through Parliament, but also because there is a concern that it could trample treaty rights and override environmental assessments. Now, yesterday, it was amended to withdraw the power to give Cabinet that ability to sidestep the Indian Act. The government says it needs this law to counter the impact of the U.S. tariffs on the Canadian economy. The minister responsible for Canada-U.S. trade, Dominic LeBlanc, met with his U.S. counterparts, notably U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer today, as the two countries continue to work towards a new economic and security deal. The deadline for that is July 21st. Now, if we don't have a deal by then, the federal government says it could increase counter tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum. Earlier today, I spoke to opposition leader in the House of Commons, Andrew Scheer, where we discussed that tariff response and the challenges facing the Conservatives this summer. Here's that conversation now. Mr. Scheer, welcome back to Power Play. Thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure.
Today, your party came out criticizing the government for not imposing counter tariffs on the United States, especially yesterday when Mr. Carney came out talking about the plan up until July 21st. Why do you think the plan that he presented yesterday isn't good enough?
Well, this is a guy who promised that he would get a deal, that he was the guy that could get things done in a crisis, and we expected him to deliver on that. It was all elbows up during the campaign, but since then we haven't seen any of that. We've seen elbows down, and in some cases, elbows tied behind our back. Mark Carney's insisting on keeping the industrial carbon tax. That's something that punishes steel and aluminum workers here in Canada because American manufacturers don't have to pay that. So it's a lot easier to move jobs and investments to the U.S. where that steel and aluminum can be manufactured without the Canadian industrial carbon tax. Mark Carney is doubling down on that. We also wanted to see robust supports for workers affected by that. So, you know, this is again a problem with a Prime Minister that won't present a budget to Canadians, won't outline the path ahead as Canada continues to face some heavy economic headwinds, much of which is imposed on our own economy by the Liberal government.
I take those points, but what about his plan and trying to sort of keep those tariffs and counter tariffs almost in his back pocket for the next 30 days as he continues to negotiate with the United States?
Well, you know, we just expected that he would carry on with the same approach as he promised Canadians that he would, and maybe expecting a Liberal to keep a promise is not a smart thing to do because they always break them. And again, you know, we talk about broken promises. In the throne speech, Mark Carney promised to cap spending at 2%. About an hour later, blew through that with an 8% spending and borrowing hike. He promised to be elbows up all through the campaign. He promised to take these tough lines, and then we see so far, since the election's over, he's taken a completely different approach. So I guess what we're saying is we're holding to the standard that he set for himself during the election campaign.
But do you believe that he should continue to follow through on a promise he made during the election, or if he is seeing that things are changing and that there is the possibility of a deal with the United States, that he wouldn't impose counter tariffs because he believes that there is something there, there's a framework there? And I guess, my question is, what do you think is better, that he holds a promise that he had made during the campaign, or that he tries to get the best deal for Canadians that he can at this time?
Well, look, first, let me say, Conservatives want Canada to get a deal on these tariffs. It'll be good for the country, it'll be good for all Canadians, and so we are supportive in that goal. It's a little bit difficult with a Prime Minister who's not keeping Parliament updated, who's not being forthcoming with Canadians about the status of the deal, how close we are, whether or not they're in active negotiations on this part or that.
But do you take the point that he's trying to do the negotiation and not informing you at the time because these negotiations are difficult? I mean, I think we know with Donald Trump that it's hard to know where he's going at the best of times. So do you expect a minute-by-minute update, or do you want them to spend that time working to do the negotiations?
Well, I do think it's important for any politician, especially this close after an election, to be honest with Canadians and to follow through on commitments. If dynamics change,
do you think he's not being honest in terms of the negotiations?
I'm saying he's certainly not adopting the same approach that he was presenting during the campaign. I think you'd have to agree with me on that.
No, I agree that I think a lot of Canadians look at it and they say that the elbows up that we all considered, and the certainly talking about putting Donald Trump on notice, and that there has been a tone change. But do you think that it is worth aggravating the U.S. president when we may be close to having a deal with him?
Well, again, it's a bit rich for Carney to suddenly justify this type of approach without a lot of rationale. And I guess what I would say is, if he wanted to explain to Canadians, explain to parliamentarians what's going on, it would help Canadians understand the massive shift in tone and approach.
Would you support a deal with the United States that still had some level of tariffs in place? And I say that because when we look at the deal that is being negotiated or seemingly struck with the United States and the United Kingdom, that there is the removal of most tariffs, but steel is still unclear. If this was put to the Conservatives and put to Parliament, would you support a deal that still had some level of tariffs in it?
Well, it's a big hypothetical to ask me to take a position on something that
it is, but it's quite possible, and I think a lot of people will look at this and say that that is a distinct possibility.
Well, I would point that Conservative governments over multiple U.S. administrations, both Republican and Democrat, have secured deals to keep tariffs off or to remove barriers to trade, like softwood lumber agreements that the previous Conservative government secured, while at the same time protecting aspects of our Canadian economy. The goal is no tariffs. Free trade works. It's a conservative principle. Free trade always benefits both countries. When people are allowed to buy and sell freely, willing seller, willing buyer, that's when you get jobs and investments and prosperity. That's when consumers get more affordable prices and workers have more opportunities to sell what they produce. So we are big free traders. That is the goal. We're going to do everything we can to help achieve that goal in opposition, and we'll see what the Liberals come back with. The promise that Mark Carney, he set the bar for himself. We will judge him by the bar he set for himself, and that was he would get a deal to lift these tariffs. So we'll see how he does.
But do you acknowledge that the landscape has changed, and it's possible that may not be what we end up with?
I acknowledge that dealing with this current U.S. administration is difficult, and that Donald Trump absolutely has proven that he can change directions at one point or another. So we recognize that, and no one is under any illusion that it will just be a matter of just a few days and a few phone calls and get this thing resolved. But that is the goal that Mark Carney set for himself. That is what he promised Canadians. He said he was the type of person who could get this done, and that's the commitment that he made to the Canadian people, and that's the standard that he should be judged by.
I want to ask you about your party, and when you consider where they are and what you guys have to do in the summer. I know that we will likely see a by-election where Mr. Poilievre will be running in Alberta, attempting to regain a seat. The latest polling numbers that we see from Nanos Research for CTV News show a gap between the Liberals and the Conservative, about 12 percentage points at this place. Why do you think that has happened now?
Well, I usually don't comment on polls. Polls can go up and down very quickly. You can see polling shifts month to month. It could be wildly different. But what we're focused on is building on the incredible gains that we had in the last election. Pierre Poilievre took our party up to near historic highs, the highest vote total in the Conservative history.
But polling is showing that you wouldn't be there if an election was held today, right now.
But we know that we have an incredibly dynamic team of new members of parliament from areas that Conservatives haven't won seats in generations. That's because our party has reflected the concerns of Canadians. All those issues that Canadians voted for Conservatives on, the cost of living, the housing crisis, the inflationary deficits that the Liberals rack up, crime plaguing our communities thanks to Liberal catch and release policies when it comes to bail, those issues are still there, and we're still communicating.
But your support isn't,
Canadians.
though. That's the difference.
Again, I'm not going to comment on one poll or another. You know, we still get a tremendous amount of positive feedback from Canadians who are telling us to stay on these issues. It's normal after an election to have some movement, but when we come back in the fall, we will have spent the summer talking to Canadians, continuing to outline how our policies would have worked better than what the Liberals are even now in these early days offering, and at the same time listening to Canadians. Our leader has struck an economic advisory council to get that direct input, that direct feedback, so that when we come back in the fall, we can say not just scrapping the Liberal industrial carbon tax, not just removing the Liberal production cap on oil and gas, but here are some other Conservative policies that would benefit Canadians, and so I look forward to that.
Your leader, I mean, you're the parliamentary leader, but the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, his numbers are at a personal low when it comes to preferred prime minister. He's at 24.2%, Mark Carney at 49.7%. Do you think he's still the right guy to lead this party, even though he's 12 points behind your entire party is 12 points behind the Liberals?
Yeah, I wouldn't get too fixated on polls, and Pierre is absolutely the right man to lead this party. He's built this movement. You know, when I go to events for Pierre, whether they're during the election or the lead up, I saw people at those events that had never voted Conservative, many of whom had never even voted, and they came to those events because Pierre inspired them with his message of hope, restoring that promise of Canada, where once again you could earn a powerful paycheck that can help you afford a home.
So he doesn't need to change despite losing his seat and him not actually winning government?
No one's suggesting that we don't need to make adjustments. Anytime you don't form government, you have to have those honest conversations with ourselves as a team, as a caucus, as a party.
As a leader for him?
Absolutely. I think Pierre would be the first one to admit that, to acknowledge that when you fall short, you have to make some adjustments. But
what do you think he has to do to adjust?
He's absolutely the right person for the job. When you look at what happened in the last election, we were facing an unprecedented series of events. We had an existential threat from the U.S., where you had a sitting president threatening to annex Canada. We haven't had to deal with that since at least the War of 1812.
Right.
And then you have the complete and utter collapse of the NDP. But despite all of that, we still got 42% of the vote. We still grew our caucus to over 140 seats and won seats in areas that we had no hope of winning in previous elections.
Agreed.
And
but you still lost the election.
All of that is thanks to Pierre, his inspirational message, and so we just got to build on what's worked, make those adjustments as a party, as a team, and Pierre is going to come back in the fall with a renewed vision for Canada.
So what does he need to do personally, though, since his popularity is not where it was?
Well, you know, we're as a team, we're looking at what happened in the last election, really diving through that to prescribe exactly where we might have been able to improve our vote total. We're going to do that with amongst ourselves and with other Canadians who want us to succeed. We're not going to listen to people who don't want Conservatives to succeed. We're not going to take advice from people who vote against us or who actively cheer for other parties. We're going to do that as a group. And when Pierre starts to unveil the plan for the next election, you're going to see once again an inspirational message that will restore the hope for Canadians. Canada has never been like this before. You know, I look out into the streets and I see violent protests advocating for violence to be done against Jews here in Canada. I see crime waves plaguing our communities. You've got extortion in communities that have never been plagued by that before, all thanks to Liberal policies. Inflation continues to take big bites out of Canadians' pockets, and Carney's doubling down on all those same Trudeau policies. So I'm confident that as people realize that Carney is going to double down on the same failed Trudeau approach, the rhetoric might be different, but the policies are the same: anti-energy, criminals' rights first, high taxes,
Can you really
high
say
spending.
anti-energy if he wants energy corridors and he's laying the groundwork with C5 to build pipelines? Can you really say anti-energy?
He will not take the industrial carbon tax off of Canadian manufacturers. He will not say that he's committed to a new pipeline. He's still saying that there has even with C5, he's still not making a commitment that will include a new pipeline. And he's still in favor of the biggest thing of all, the oil and gas production cap. And when you limit what Canadians can take out of the ground and sell to the world, you are limiting the amount of jobs that can be created. You're limiting the amount of prosperity that can be spread around our Canadian economy from coast to coast. That's the exact same policies of Justin Trudeau. Mark Carney is even doubling down on the EV mandate. The Liberals are going to make it illegal to buy your favorite gas-powered car, truck, or minivan. Mark Carney had an opportunity this week to vote against that ban. He voted to uphold it. So again, he's still doubling down on all these same Trudeau policies.
Okay, unfortunately, Mr. Scheer, we're going to have to leave it there. I appreciate you spending the time with us. Parliamentary Leader for the Conservatives, Andrew Scheer, thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Coming up just a little later in the show, we're going to take you live to Parliament Hill. You have a live shot right here looking at the foyer of the House of Commons, where Prime Minister Mark Carney is expected to speak in just a few moments. He's expected to talk about the passage of Bill C5, which is still making its way through the House of Commons. It's also known as the One Canadian Economy Act. We're also going to go talk to our front bench coming up in just a few moments. We've got Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, George Soul, and Rachel Aiel. They'll all be right here when Power Play returns.
It guts environmental protections, undermines workers, and threatens Indigenous rights. This bill will end up in court. Why is this government violating democratic values and risking critical economic projects by tactics from Donald Trump's playbook?
There is lots of support in this country for this brilliant piece of legislation that will create one economy, not 13, will move us towards creating great national projects that will create jobs. And I would invite the leader, I know he will stand with me and with the men and women in Canada's labour movement.
That's reaction on Parliament Hill today before today's vote on the Liberal government's contentious Bill C5, also known as the One Canadian Economy Act. It is expected to pass, and once again, this is a live look at the House of Commons foyer, where Prime Minister Mark Carney is also expected to speak about the bill once it does pass. Now, the Liberals are expected to pass the bill any moment now with the help of the Conservatives. The bill has received a lot of criticism, though, from First Nations communities over its lack of consultation. And joining me right now to speak more about this is the Assembly of First Nations National Chief, Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanak. Thank you so much for joining us, National Chief.
Thank you for welcoming us to your show.
I wanted to ask you, first of all, you're one of many First Nation leaders that is asking Governor General Mary Simon to intervene in this using her powers. What exactly do you want her to do?
Look, I'm not going to comment on that any further, but I am just going to say that I think Parliament can do the right thing and the Senate can do the right thing. Next week, we will be talking to senators. We've been talking to them all day. We'll continue to talk to them throughout the weekend and throughout next week on, making sure that First Nations rights holders, have a chance to speak on Bill C5 during the legislative process. So far, they have been shut out. The Assembly of First Nations remains very concerned about the lack of time and the refusal to accommodate First Nations rights holders wishing to have direct input into the legislative process that is advancing Bill C5 on the One Canadian Economy Act very quickly. We have witnessed the unacceptable exclusion of many chiefs this past week as they were turned away and specifically uninvited from participation in the Parliamentary Committee of the House of Commons and the Senate of Canada. And it is 2025. And I think for any Canadian, First Nations included, it's not acceptable to keep First Nations rights holders out of discussions about their rights as they are being legislated on. This should not be the Canadian way.
National Chief, I know you said that you don't want to comment any further on asking Mary Simon to intervene. I just want to be clear, though, is that still your wish, that you want her to intervene on this?
Look, I think right now I want senators and members of parliament to do the right thing. I think that they need to make sure that that they're doing everything that they can to make sure that they're hearing Canadians, First Nations included, and following their own processes and bills rather than ramming through a bill that could really much affect our children and grandchildren and other governments down the road. That we want to make sure that things are done properly and carefully, and that First Nations are consulted, and we haven't been. And it's disheartening when I went to speak for 5 minutes both times, 5 minutes in the House, to have so many leadership from coast to coast to coast sitting with me that weren't able to speak for themselves. And I think that has to change. We can do better as a country.
Now, the Prime Minister has said, as he's been presenting this bill and as he's been talking about it, that Indigenous communities will be consulted along the way. Do you not believe him?
It's not that, I don't want to talk about belief or not, but, we don't want to go into hypothetical situations. We always want to make sure that, when you're doing bills like this, that they're in black and white, that people are consulted properly, that our lawyers, our First Nations experts, our First Nations experts in law, our First Nations experts on our treaty rights, that they have a chance to thoroughly review. And I don't think 7 days is enough time. We need a little bit more time. We need time to review this properly. We need time for chiefs and leadership across the country to gather so that they can speak about this and how this is going to affect us for the years to come. And I don't think that that's a whole lot to ask. Look, the Parliament wanting to ram this through, take the summer, take the time to speak to First Nations.
I wanted to ask you specifically about one of the amendments that was made on Wednesday, and it did take away Cabinet's ability to sidestep the Indian Act, but you had called that a limited change. Why do you think that's limited? Well,
I think, just some of the amendments that have been made to Bill C-5, it is encouraging that the Part 2 Purpose Clause implies, and statements by the Prime Minister and other Minister of the Crown explicitly promise that free, prior, and informed consent standard will be applied to every proposed project or national interest project to be, quote, pre-approved by this legislation. That pre-approval, however, in itself contrary to the free, prior, and informed consent standard and jurisprudence on the duty to consult, accommodate, and obtain consent. So it is not at all clear why Part 2 does not include an operative provision requiring what the Purpose Clause and ministers have repeatedly promised: free, prior, and informed consent from First Nations affected by any given project that is approved under the extraordinary powers conferred on Cabinet, Ministers of the Crown by Parliament. The AFN calls on senators to address this deficiency. And so this weekend, Canadians will be marking National Indigenous Peoples Day and a 4-year anniversary of the passage of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. The advocacy of First Nations and solidarity with each other will continue in our collective work to protect our rights as nations and as people. So we are peoples and nations under international law, and inherent authority and jurisdiction on our reserve lands and traditional territories. So we do need time to speak to our experts to see what their recommendations are. And I know many First Nations are wanting to submit written submissions. 34 of them are still fighting firefighters. What about those 34 communities right across the country that haven't had time to review this and to give us their opinion on what should be changed, what should be included, and if it's a good enough bill or not? And we need that time to speak with each other. And it's a two-way street with government. I think the Prime Minister and the ministers themselves need to be out there speaking to the country, First Nations included, as well as Canadians and environmental groups.
Nobody wants to sort of prejudge what may happen, but there have been threats in the last couple of weeks from different Indigenous communities and Indigenous leadership that if this bill goes forward and does become law, that we could be seeing what some have called an Idle No More 2.0 with disruptions in different trade corridors and that type of thing. What can you say to Canadians about what we will hear from Indigenous voices going forward if this legislation also goes forward this summer?
Look, I think First Nations want to be They don't want to stop prosperity. They want to be a part of prosperity. They've been wanting that since the beginning of time. I mean, we signed treaties that we would share equally in the resources of this country. And, we just want our own share in this country. We don't want anyone's, and I just think that we also don't want our rights trampled on. And trust is a big thing. I think relationships need to be built. I know we've been building. I thought that we were coming a long way, and I think that we are. But at the same time, when ramming a bill like this through that affects our rights, and some people haven't had time to digest it, maybe they haven't had time to review it properly within their own communities and with their own lawyers and legal experts, that's, it's tough to, and we haven't had time to meet as a collective. So we do want to meet as a collective this summer, and we're just asking for the time to do that properly.
Okay. National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanak, I appreciate you coming on such short notice and giving us the time today and giving us your perspective as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
You were looking at right there a live look inside the House of Commons as the final vote for C5 continues at this hour. When we come back, yes, Parliament is out for summer. School is almost out too. We're going to bring in our front bench. They've been busy with their red pens and they're ready to give out some grades. Stay with us. Power Play will be right back with that and possibly the Prime Minister if everything passes in time. Stay with us. Welcome back to Power Play. We continue to watch Parliament Hill at this hour, where C5, also known as the One Canadian Economy Act, is expected to pass any moment right now. You are looking at the votes happening virtually. These are the members of Parliament who are able to do this remotely, either from their community or from wherever they are in this world. They do not have to be in the House of Commons. You can see the countdown timer there, 3 minutes and just about 30 seconds right now left in this vote. And then, of course, when that is tabulated, they'll know whether or not it is passed. And then we are expected to hear from the Prime Minister. Now, Bill C5 is the centerpiece of the Liberal plan to shift the Canadian economy away from our dependence on the U.S. And we are expecting to hear from Prime Minister Mark Carney on the passing of C5 in a few moments. First, though, we're going to break down the legislation with our front bench. Sabrina Grover was a federal Liberal candidate in the 2021 election. She's a senior advisor at Spark Advocacy and North Star Public Affairs. Melanie Paradis is a former communications director to Aaron O'Toole. She's now the president of Texture Communications. George Soul was a former director of communications for the federal NDP. He is now the principal at On Step Strategies. Thank you all for being here. Sabrina, I'm going to start with you on this one. Now, many conservatives have said to me that if this bill was put forth by the Tories, they would have had a much tougher time. So why do you think that isn't the case here?
Well, it's so interesting because they're supporting it. So I'm not sure that they would have had a tougher time in getting it passed. And I think that they're supporting it because they know that this is what Canadians want and this is what Canadians voted for. I think that we have this external pressure of the United States that we have never had before. And it's not something that we can go back on, right? Even though Donald Trump may have softened his language around the 51st state, even though he seems to be more respectful these days, he's still a ticking he's still a ticking time bomb. We don't know what he's going to do at any given time. And we know that we do have to build these relationships in Canada and that the One Economy bill, breaking down these trade barriers, making projects much more expedited is what Canadians want. And it's also what the premiers want. And we've heard that a number of times, both in the First Minister's meeting recently and in the First Minister's meeting that the Prime Minister would have had right after his leadership election. So I think, at the end of the day, this is what people want, and that's what we're getting done.
Melanie, to Sabrina's point, the Liberals did get some help from the Conservatives on this bill, but do you think that's where it ends in terms of any kind of collaboration because it's so specific around trying to get these energy corridors, around trying to make sure that we have one economy instead of 13?
No, I think that there can and should absolutely continue to be collaboration on any legislation and projects of national significance that are going to help move Canada forward and make Canada stronger. That's clearly what public opinion is telling us that the people of Canada want. We saw this in the election, and we continue to see it in all of the polling. And I think you could also see it reflected a bit in the national chief's comments that in the interview you did with her just now. I think that Indigenous leaders are also taking a pause, and that they are also reflecting on the issues environment that we are in and the tone of Canadians and of elected officials across the country. And they understand that the rhetoric around Idle No More, around blockades, that may have been the playbook for the past 20 years, and that may have worked when the public opinion was very different. But in this environment, it's not going to fly. And so I think that we're seeing them be pause and be more reflective and think about what's the best way to approach and position their concerns about this bill, about the projects that may be moved forward, so that they can articulate them in a way that Canadians will understand and empathize with.
George, what do you make of what the Assembly of First Nations National Chief said, plus what we hear from Mark Carney? He's got some reassurances that they're going to be more responsible with the power that is afforded to them in this bill.
Well, first of all, I think we should congratulate Pierre Poilievre, because it turns out the Conservatives did win the last election. Mark Carney just happens to be the leader. What
Shots
we're
fired.
Is it is a bill that had Stephen Harper brought forward. I mean, reminiscent of Bill C-51. You look at their Bill C-2 that takes up goes into privacy issues. It makes Bill C-51 of Stephen Harper, look like nothing at all. And so I think that we're seeing Mark Carney take advantage, and fair enough, of the honeymoon he's got to really ram through some legislation. The name of this bill is the One Canadian Economy Act. I think that part of the bill, I think you'd find nobody who's opposed to it. We should not be restricted from border to border across the provinces. I think that work is important, and it's good that it's happening. As far as ramming through a bill that's going to make it easier for one minister, not even the whole cabinet, but one minister to ram through whatever national project they want, that's a problem. And, I think, listening to First Nations across the country raise concerns, it's fair. We're going to see how this goes forward. But I think, as the honeymoon wears off, it's going to be harder and harder for Mark Carney to convince folks that everything's fine. And speaking to Stephen Harper, the lesson that everyone should have learned is when you make it easier when you make the process so you can ram through these major projects, they don't actually happen. So do I think major projects should happen across this country? Absolutely. We need to build our own economy. We need to be stronger. That's great. But anything that takes away these processes means we're going to get tied up in courts with people fighting them, and people are going to protest, and these projects aren't actually going to happen now. So it's actually counter the lessons we've learned in the past.
Just reminding viewers that we're continuing to watch the House of Commons right now, and specifically in the foyer where Prime Minister Mark Carney is expected to speak after the passage of Bill C-5. We continue to watch inside the House of Commons right now. It looks like there are still some votes going on. Sabrina, I wanted to ask you specifically about how a lot of people are talking about this bill and the way it was passed. I mean, George just mentioned how it was rammed through. The Prime Minister continues to say that time is of the essence and we need to move quickly. But do you think that he has successfully made that argument to people that we need to do this quickly, not to say in lieu of actually having a more robust conversation about it, but do you think he's made the case enough that this has been enough time to look at this bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think to George's point about bringing up, the time of Stephen Harper is this is a very, very different time than when Prime Minister Harper was elected, right? Like, we didn't have this external geopolitical threat that we have today. We didn't have what is one, potentially two major significant global wars that are going to, unfold in the next couple of months here. And we didn't have the United States breathing down our neck, looking over us to see when they're going to get access to our resources, what kind of, tariffs they can put on us to make our lives miserable. And so the difference between today and when Harper was Prime Minister are significant. And I think Canadians recognize that. Mel referenced some of the polling. Some of the polling that Spark Insights put out recently says that over 70% of people are supportive or moderately supportive of projects being accelerated, of economic projects being on the books today and being expedited so that we can see results. And I think what's important for Mark Carney and for the government is to actually demonstrate those results. So I do agree that if he isn't able to actually put a project on the books, I know proponents aren't there necessarily, but isn't able to put a project on the books and get things accelerated, that will be problematic for them. But if they're demonstrating this willingness, they're demonstrating this openness to investment, they're willing to work with both premiers and business to get things done, I think that you're going to see this government continue to have the approval of Canadians and the let's go ahead from Canadians to actually build these pipelines or any project.
Melanie, how much pressure is on this government to have either a ribbon cutting ceremony or a shovel or a sod shoveling ceremony, dirt shoveling ceremony, I should say, in the next 12 months to say, yeah, this bill made that project, and to sort of give everybody the so-called proof in the pudding?
Absolutely enormous amount of pressure. I think that there will be, a schedule of photo ops of Prime Minister Carney with golden shovels across the country throughout the fall. That's certainly what I would recommend doing if I was working on his team anyway. I think that the pressure is on not just him, it's on the provinces as well. So the provincial governments have put forward to the Prime Minister what their priorities are. So now it's up to him to determine which of those projects the federal government is going to help support with the provinces, which ones are they going to help fund. Obviously, we won't be seeing a budget until the fall, probably later in the fall, and we may not know what projects have been selected until then. The process around C5 is also going to require a lot of explaining of what the new regulatory process and regime is. I mean, they talk about having a one window approach with one minister, but I don't think that's really clear to stakeholders who, many of these projects are already a bit down the road where submissions have already been made in terms of environmental assessments. They've already started doing some of the work. What's the impact going to be on that work if you now have a new regulatory process? So I think there's still a lot of questions related to how exactly this is going to work.
George, pick up on that in terms of the pressure on this government, but also the questions that still are left to be answered.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree both with it being the right strategy, and I think they're going to do it. It'll be photo ops, all over the place. I think the standard for what deserves a photo op is going to drop rapidly, and so it's going to be going from we'd love to be digging dirt for a pipeline to, hey, look, we changed a doorknob on a, it's going to be reminiscent again of Stephen Harper, and there'll be billboards everywhere to say, look, the thing that we're building, and I think again the standards are going to drop because projects aren't going to get built. Again, I want to be clear. I am a Northern Ontario New Democrat who I was senior staff in Saskatchewan, and I was around the table with Rachel Notley when we finally got TMX the Trans Mountain Pipeline actually approved and the process starting to get it built. Again, what that proved was you need to build the support, not just ram these projects through. So, I think as the honeymoon wears off, the soil turning events will happen and the photo ops will be coming, but I don't think those big projects are going to happen unless the Liberals learn the lessons of the past, step back, and really build that support across multiple communities and through industry to actually make these things happen.
So Sabrina, then what does this government have to do over the summer to make sure that once either they come back in September, that there is something there, or that they've properly explained to Canadians that don't worry, something is coming?
So I think number one, they're going to have, it's been a rapid series of events since January, and it feels like this is the summer to kind of catch your breath and figure out what the strategy is going forward. I think already between, Prime Minister Trudeau and now Prime Minister Carney, we've seen a huge shift in the ability to communicate and effectively, not only from Prime Minister Carney, but also his ministers are much more effective, the ones he's putting in the window on communicating their strategies and their priorities. I think what I would suggest for this government in the summer is to regroup with caucus to make sure that caucus is all on side on being able to explain this and rationalize this and have these conversations when they're in community, at neighborhood barbecues or door knocking or whatever it might be. And for them to be really clear about setting aside or picking, 2 to 3 big priorities that they want to actually put in the window for the fall and get through, in addition to a budget. And I think that being really focused on 2 or 3 big things is going to be better than trying to do 30 things at once and doing some of them not well. And I think that that will be an important thing that caucus and cabinet will have to figure out during the summer.
Okay, we are going to take one more commercial break here on Power Play. When we come back, yes, we're still watching Parliament Hill for that press conference with Prime Minister Mark Carney as soon as Bill C-5 is passed, where that is tracking for about 15 minutes from now. And of course, the best time for a press conference on a Friday is at 6 o'clock. But we're also going to go back to school because, of course, Parliament is almost out for the summer, school as well, and our front bench has been very busy tabulating all the grades and checking out who does need a bit more time at summer school. We'll be back with that in just a moment.
Yeas pour 335, 335. Nays contre 1.
I declare part 1 of the short title carried.
So that was the House of Commons just moments ago when the first part of Bill C-5 passed. It is now actually in the second part of that bill, and it looks like that vote is wrapping up shortly. Before we get to that, we are going to talk about how the House of Commons is rising for a summer break today after these votes. And it'll bring to an end a few tumultuous months on Parliament Hill. It's also been a dynamic political time provincially and really around the world. So which leaders are getting a top grade and which ones are leaving a little more to be desired? We're going to bring back the front bench. Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, and welcoming back Rachel Aiello, national correspondent for CTV. And because she's back, we're going to ask her first with your positive grade for a politician.
Yes, happy to be back. I've been watching that vote like a true nerd.
Yeah.
So my positive grade is going to Justin Trudeau. I'm giving him an A for leaving when
Stop
he
the
did.
presses. First
Breaking
time in
news.
forever, but go ahead.
Yeah. Let's not forget about Justin Trudeau.
Wow.
It really feels like we have. So I am giving him my A because of the timing of when he left. You know, leading up to his departure for months, it felt like we were talking about. He's gone on too long. He's waited too long. The party is never going to be able to rebuild and win again. But that is exactly what Mark Carney did. And I think kind of noting the moment and the state of the friction with U.S. President Donald Trump and knowing that there was still a pathway and an opportunity that at one time he thought he was going to be able to leverage in Canadians being concerned again about the U.S., getting out of the way essentially so Carney could take on that lead. Like he has allowed it for the Liberal government to maintain government. We thought it was the end of a Trudeau era, an end of Liberal red for quite some time, but here we are with Mark Carney looking pretty strong in his minority. So I think that some credit should be given to Trudeau, although I'm sure, you know, political memory is short. People take a little bit of time to look back with clear eyes, but I do think history will look back at Trudeau's decision positively.
Mel, you thought that you gave hot takes, but wow, Rachel's giving you a run for your money.
Got to do it for the last episode of the season.
Yeah, why not, right? Mel, you're up with your good grade.
Okay, so I'm giving my A to Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston. He recently went viral with his incredible video, I Am Nova Scotian. I encourage everyone to give it a watch. It's really, really powerful and it inspires a lot of pride. This is a man who won a historic second mandate with the most seats ever in Nova Scotia. He's been a national leader on breaking down internal trade barriers, and Nova Scotia was the first province to legislate them. He's been fighting to get Nova Scotia to stand on its own 2 feet when it comes to getting resource projects moving. He's lowered the sales tax. He's indexed tax brackets to inflation. And he's also advancing an offshore wind project. I mean, he's doing a bit of everything, and it's really impressive.
Okay, before we go on to you, George, I just got a note that Bill C-5 is officially passed. It is now law, or actually, excuse me, it should be off to the Senate before Rachel jumps on me because she knows process like nobody else. It's live TV, Rachel. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Yeah, it's off to the Senate, everybody, lest we forget about the upper chamber. Okay, George, before I make any more procedural mistakes, how about you save me with your good grade?
Well, the Governor General comes after that even. But I'm with you. And
True.
First of all, I agree. I'm happy for anyone to give Justin Trudeau an A as long as the next words out of their mouths are for leaving. So I'll support Rachel on that. My A goes to Saskatchewan NDP leader Carla Beck. Carla Beck became leader just a couple of years ago. I know it's hard to imagine, but the NDP in that province was basically one election away from probably packing it in. No New Democrat Party has ever faced that before, and it's not at all relevant in any way now. And
no, not at all.
After that election, though, she came just a couple seats short or shy of forming government. And really, like, this is the NDP had been kind of the natural governing party of Saskatchewan for decades, and then struggled after 2007. I was chief of staff there for a couple of years, and in just the 2 years that I was there, I worked for 4 different leaders. So there was a lot of turnover, a lot of struggle. But in that last election, Carla was able to put together a plan and a clear message for people across the province. She grew up on a farm, rural Saskatchewan, and got that message out and reminded people that the NDP is the party of working people and rural communities. She also, when Scott Moe dropped the ball on doing anything at all about tariffs, despite steel and resources being such an important part of the economy in Saskatchewan, Carla, as leader of the official opposition, stepped up and started touring, working with not only labor but also industry. And then more recently, again, Scott Moe dropped the ball, and we're learning more and more about what a failure the evacuation process was in Saskatchewan, with the devastating fires that just ripped across the north, but much of the province. And again, she and her caucus went up to the community, really worked with folks, helped with the evacuation process, and are now digging into how to make sure that things go better next time. So just a stellar performance, and something that people didn't see coming. But you get the right leader involved, and she was able to rebuild that party. And I think, maybe a couple of years from now, after the next election, I won't have to say leader of the Saskatchewan NDP, but I'll be able to say Premier Beck gets the A. So looking forward to that.
Okay, Sabrina, we got to move on to you now.
All right. I think this might be a surprise to some, but my A goes to Doug Ford. I think that Doug Ford has played the first half of this year masterfully and has really been just phenomenal in a political masterclass in how you actually get things done. When we think back to earlier this year, that first engagement with Donald Trump, talking about the 51st state, the tariffs, he really emerged as Captain Canada. I think he was, of all of the premiers, the only one that I think took not only a firm stance, but also came with something to play with at that table. He had a threat on the table. He was able to execute it. Mixed reviews on after that, but he was the only one, I think, taking a leadership role, and I think that was important for Canada at the time. His calling of the election, some people might call it crass, I call it politics, to come out with another historic majority. I think that again plays really well into providing that stability in Ontario and providing that stability for the country when you think about the threats that Donald Trump and the United States will play. And I just think overall he's been a great communicator. The numbers are not reflecting it right now, and I think he is going to have some problems with the bill that he's put on the table with respect to energy projects and development in Ontario. But to date, I think he's done a phenomenal job. Mark it down, Mel. I said it. He's done a phenomenal job, and he really, I think that of what Conservatives have won and lost this year, I think he was a winner in the federal versus Ontario PC Conservative battle. So I think he's done a great job.
Okay, so we are running out of time, but I do want to get the bad grades in. I'm going to say that this is because we want to spread positivity, but if you can give me 10 seconds each on your bad picks, only because we are actually running out of time and not because we always like to be positive. Sabrina, start with you. Your bad pick, if you give me 10 to 15 seconds, I'll appreciate it forever.
Okay, I think no surprises for me here. My F grade goes to Pierre Poilievre, and as I discussed this with my colleagues earlier, I shout out to one of them for the best lines is, does he get an F or does he get an incomplete because he hasn't even shown up to work yet?
Love it. Melanie, you get your bad pick now.
My F goes to Ontario Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie, the incredible disappearing woman. Where is she? What's going on? That's it. That's all I've got.
Another person that obviously you feel, yeah. Hasn't shown up to work, I guess, eh?
Yeah.
Love it. Okay, George, you're up.
Well, I mean, at least Bonnie Crombie has a job to show up to that she's not showing up to, so that makes her a bit different. We've covered the bill quite a bit, but I think Minister McKinnon gets my F, although sort of on behalf of a bunch of his caucus, his fellow cabinet ministers, this really has become, and I know I'm stealing this line, but the Prime Minister Carney is CEO Carney, and the cabinet has really taken a back seat to this stuff. And Minister McKinnon did not take responsibility for this bill, does not really understand what it does, and can't defend it at all. And if you don't believe me, then some people should go find the clip with his interview with Vashi earlier this week. It is maybe the best example of a minister stepping on rake after rake after rake during an interview.
And somehow you didn't keep it to 15 seconds. So, Rachel, you got to be super quick because the Prime Minister is almost at the microphone.
Jagmeet Singh, and no, Drake didn't pay me to say that.
Yeah, I love that. There's Mark Carney. We're going to take you to him live right now.